The Stryder class is easily my favorite Titan chassis in Titanfall. Between all three of the Titan chassis, I feel that the Stryder Titans requires and rewards skilled play the most. Even back in Titanfall 1, I used the Stryder Titan exclusively, and in Titanfall 2, Northstar is my favorite Titan to play. In this video, I'm going to go over my thoughts for the Stryder class Titan redesigns. Like the last video, I'm going to go through each Titan one by one and discuss weapon options, weapon attachments, defensive abilities, utility abilities, offensive abilities, core functionality, and Titan-specific kits. Again, if you haven't watched my video on Titan functionality, I highly recommend you go back and watch it since many of my changes are based upon ideas discussed in that video. Anyways, let's start with Ronin. Ronin is one of the most interesting Titans in Titanfall 2. I can't ever recall a time where he was buffed or nerfed in any significant way, yet Ronin has still managed to shift around various states of balance. When Titanfall 2 first launched, I still remember people complaining about how he was underpowered. But as time went on, it seems as though Ronin has steadily climbed his way up to the top. Now I'm going to say something that many of you will probably disagree with. I think Ronin is slightly too powerful and needs a nerf. Before you type your comment, let me explain. The issue I have with Ronin is that he doesn't have any real consistent weakness while still getting some of the best benefits that the game has to offer. Ronin has the fastest chassis, the most dashes, the longest melee range, an insanely useful utility ability, a powerful, consistent, and accurate primary weapon, an offensive ability that stuns enemies and bypasses defensive abilities, and the smallest, hardest to hit weak point. Ronin's two major drawbacks are a lack of range and a low amount of health, but Ronin has an extremely quick chassis to make up for his lack of range, a consistent defensive ability and small weak point to make up for his lack of health, and phase dash, which helps in both departments. Every other Titan in the game has some major drawback that other players can exploit if they're smart. You can drain Ion's energy, you can bypass Tone's particle wall, you can kill Monarch with an anti-Titan weapon, you can catch Northstar out of position, you can keep Scorch at range, and you can punish Legion while he's reloading. But with Ronin, I feel as though he always has an easy way out by activating Sword Block or using Phase Dash. On top of this, Ronin offers a level of versatility that the other Titans simply don't. Ronin is the best Titan at farming AI, transporting flag carriers, defending flags or hardpoints from pilots, flanking, dealing damage, tanking damage, assisting, killing pilots, 1v1 Titan duels, and Team Titan fights. The only other Titan that offers a similar level of flexibility is Ion. But with Ion, that flexibility comes at the price of raw damage output, while Ronin deals some of the highest burst damage in the game. There isn't one major thing that makes Ronin overpowered, it's a combination of many factors that does. Now I'm not trying to imply that Ronin takes no skill to use. In fact, I would say that Ronin is one of the more skill-based Titans. But while I firmly believe that skilled play should be rewarded, I think the reward that skilled play gives Ronin is a bit too high. A skilled Ronin player can deal insane amounts of damage, move quickly, and inflate his health to 12 bars with the press of a single button. It's no surprise to me that the most highly skilled players use Ronin almost exclusively, and a teabagging Generation 100 pilot with a stoic Dark Ronin Prime is practically Titanfall 2's biggest cliché. So with all of this in mind, I'm going to explain my Ronin redesign. Starting off with Ronin's abilities, let's talk about Sword Block. The way Sword Block functions in Titanfall 2 is one of my biggest balance-based issues I have with the game. But I also understand that as a close-range, low-health Titan, Ronin needs a reliable and effective defensive ability to remain viable. I've had a few ideas for how to nerf Sword Block. One idea I had was to make it so that upon initial activation, Sword Block would absorb 100% of damage, but the longer you held it, the less damage you would block. Another idea I had would be to make Sword Block only last for a limited duration and have a short cooldown. But my favorite idea would be to simply make it so that Sword Block only absorbs damage from 180 degrees of where you're facing, meaning that while it's active, you're still exposed from behind. This helps all Titans, but I think it would help Scorch especially, since his incendiary traps affect targets from all sides. Other than that, Sword Block would still negate 75% of damage and function identically to the way it does in Titanfall 2. For Variance, players could choose between Phase Blade, Speed Blade, or Absorbing Blade. Phase Blade would cause Phase Dash to recharge faster while Sword Block is absorbing damage. Speed Blade would allow Ronin to sprint while using Sword Block, and Absorbing Blade would cause your core to charge while absorbing damage. Next is Phase Dash. This is probably my favorite utility ability in the game, and I think it suits Ronin's playstyle very well. But unlike many of the other elements of Ronin's kit, I don't find this ability frustrating or too powerful. For Variance, players could choose between Realm Walker, Phase Reload, or Temporal Anomaly. Realm Walker would allow Ronin to stay in the phase dimension for a longer duration. Phase Reload would automatically reload your weapon upon using Phase Dash, and Temporal Anomaly would make Phase Dash recharge much faster, allowing you to use it more often. Lastly, we have Arc Wave. This is a great ability that I feel does a bit too much at once. Arc Wave deals damage, stuns enemies, bypasses defensive abilities, and destroys particle walls. At the same time, these extra effects are what defines Arc Wave, and I don't want to see them disappear entirely. To compromise, I think that Arcwave's extra effects should come back to the variant selections. The Shield Breaker variant would allow Arcwave to instantly destroy particle walls and bypass offensive abilities, while the Stun Wave variant would apply the stun effect. By splitting these effects between the different variants, players would have access to them but could only choose one or the other. The last variant would be Extended Wave, which would increase the range and decrease the recharge rate of Arcwave. For Ronin's weapons and attachments, I've mentioned all of these in a previous video, so I'll just recap these really quick. All of Ronin's weapon options are actually in Titanfall 1 or 2, and there are no new ideas from me. Players could choose between the Lead Wall, the Quad Rocket, and the Triple Threat. For weapon attachments, all three of these weapons could equip Extended Mag and Speed Reload, which would increase magazine capacity by 1 and increase reload speed respectively. The Lead Wall would also have access to ricochet rounds and a shotgun choke. Ricochet rounds would cause lead wall shots to ricochet off of hard surfaces, overpenetrate targets, and show the bullet trajectory while zooming in, while the choke would increase lead wall's accuracy and projectile travel speed while zooming in. The Quad Rocket and Triple Threat would also have access to Extra Shot and explosive munitions. Extra Shot would cause the weapons to fire an additional projectile with each pull of a trigger, making the Quad Rocket fire 5 rounds instead of 4, and making the Triple Threat fire 4 grenades instead of 3. The explosive munitions attachment would simply cause the grenades and rockets to have a larger splash radius, making it easier to land hits with splash damage. For Ronin's core ability, I think that Sword Core is excellent for the most part. I like the idea of Ronin getting an overall general buff to his kit. However, what I don't like is how much versatility the core gives you. Sword Core falls into the same trap that Arcwave does, where it just does a little bit too much. With a single core, Ronin can deal a high amount of damage, absorb an insane amount of damage, and move extremely quickly. So if Ronin returns for Titanfall 3, I would love for his Sword Core to be replaced by a new and improved Dash Core. Dash Core would function similarly to how it did in Titanfall 1, where your dashes recharge extremely quickly. One notable difference though would be that the Dash Core in Titanfall 3 would also make Phase Dash recharge extremely quickly as well. Players could also use their primary weapon while their core is active, giving them more options to engage enemy players. However, Dash Core wouldn't buff your melee damage, Sword Block, or Arc Wave like Sword Core does unless you select specific kits, which brings me to the next topic. I think many of Ronin's kit selections work really well in Titanfall 2, but with my redesign in mind, as well as changes to Titan functionality, I had to come up with 4 completely new kits. The first is the Blade Runner kit. I know that Respawn likes to give little nods to movie franchises, so I named this kit with that in mind. References aside, this kit would increase Ronin's melee damage for a few seconds after dashing or after sprinting for a short duration. There would probably need to be some sort of visual effect to indicate to both the user and enemy players that the damage increase has been applied. The next kit is Agile Chassis. This is Ronin's chassis-specific upgrade which, as per usual, reduces the duration that Ronin is affected by arc effects. Additionally, Agile Chassis would also increase Ronin's sprint speed. The third kit would be Block Core. Block Core would increase the amount of damage that Sword Block negates from 75 to 90% with Dash Core active, and blocking damage while your core is active would increase its duration. Lastly, there would be the Sword Core kit. This kit would cause you to put away your primary weapon and use your sword while Dash Core is active, effectively transforming it back into Sword Core. Your melee and arc wave damage would be drastically increased while your core is active, however you would not receive the 90% damage resistance on Sword Block like you do in Titanfall 2. And that wraps it up for my Ronin redesign. I know that a lot of players won't like a lot of my changes, but I think they would fit really well into the way Titans function in my vision of Titanfall 3. It's important to keep in mind that these changes probably wouldn't work well in Titanfall 2 with its current design, and I urge you guys to consider these changes from the lens of how Titans would function in Titanfall 3, rather than how they currently function in Titanfall 2. At this point, it's no secret that Northstar is my favorite Titan, but I was actually quite surprised with how difficult it was to come up with a redesign. Part of that is probably personal bias, since I really like how Northstar plays right now, and I don't want to see her change too much. But the other part of the problem is that Northstar is a Titan whose strength comes from positioning and map awareness, and it's difficult to see how she would play without knowing what Titanfall 3's map design is like. Of all my Titan redesigns, I'm probably the least confident with Northstar since so many of my ideas are contingent upon the maps being designed in a particular way. But with that being said, I still gave it my best shot and put a lot of thought into this redesign, so let's get into it. More than most Titans, I feel that Northstar's abilities all synergize with her overall design really well, so it should come as no surprise that I don't want to see these abilities be replaced. Tether traps may seem weak at first, but once you understand how to properly use them, they're extremely effective. Per variance, players could choose between twin traps, stealth traps, or heavy traps. Twin traps would give you an extra tether trap charge. This is different to how twin traps worked in Titanfall 2, where 2 traps would be deployed at once upon use. The issue I have with this is that the value of tether traps comes from placing them in key precise locations, and twin traps in Titanfall 2 somewhat ruins that. On the other hand, stealth traps would become invisible shortly after being placed, making them nearly impossible for enemy titans to spot, and heavy traps would be more difficult to destroy and hold titans in place for a longer duration. Next up is VTOL Hover. This ability is the one that has given me the most trouble given how dependent it is on map design. I like how VTOL Hover allows me to peek over walls and buildings, but I always found it a bit lacking. With how horizontal the map design is in Titanfall 2, I feel this ability is almost missing half of its functionality. VTOL Hover could be a great ability for flying between different elevations or over obstacles, but sadly I don't feel that Titanfall 2 has too many maps that actually let me do this. It's kind of a shame since as a Titan that emphasizes positioning and map awareness, Northstar could really benefit from this unique type of map traversal. So personally, I would really love if VTOL Hover could allow you to fly over buildings in Titanfall 3. I'm not quite sure how this could really work, since I would hate to see Northstar sitting on rooftops and head glitching for cheap kills. There would probably need to be some sort of system in place to prevent Northstar from being able to stand on rooftops while still allowing her to fly over them. However, if there is a way to get this working, I think it would add a lot more utility to the ability. Now, I've only thought of 2 variants so far, and I didn't want to force any ideas, so if you guys have some thoughts on what a third variant could be, please feel free to share them. The 2 variants I've thought of are Viper Thrusters and VTOL Jump. Viper Thrusters would work the same way they do in Titanfall 2, increasing your movement speed while hovering. VTOL Jump, however, would function entirely differently. Instead of hovering above the battlefield, upon activation, Northstar would leap in the direction of your movement. If you are standing still, Northstar would jump straight into the air for a short time. If you're moving forward, backwards, left, or right, she would perform a jump in that direction. This would be a great variant for quick escapes and repositioning, but while in the air, Northstar couldn't move until she touched the ground again, making it a risky maneuver. Northstar's last ability is Cluster Missile. There isn't really that much to say about this ability other than I really like the way it functions, and I don't think it needs any major changes. For variants, players could choose between Cluster Mine, a missile that embeds into the ground and detonates when enemies come in range, Enhanced Cluster Missile, a missile that has significantly higher splash damage radius and lasts longer, and High Velocity Cluster Missile, a missile that travels and recharges faster. For Northstar's weapons and attachments, the Plasma Railgun is the perfect weapon to complement Northstar's playstyle, and it should definitely return. This is my personal favorite Titan weapon, and is one of the many reasons why Northstar is my favorite Titan overall. For attachments, players could choose between Extended Mag, Threat Optics, Ricochet rounds, or Tracking rounds. Extended Mag does exactly what it says it does, increasing the base magazine from 6 to 8. Threat Optics works the same way it does in Titanfall 2, where upon zooming in, enemy targets are highlighted red, making them easier to see. Ricochet rounds would function the same way they do on the lead wall, allowing shots to ricochet off hard surfaces, over-penetrating targets, and displaying the bullet trajectory while zooming in. The last attachment is Tracking rounds, which may seem kind of odd for Northstar to have access to, but I think it actually adds an interesting option. Tracking rounds would allow critical hits to lock onto the target, enabling Cluster Missile to home in on them. This would be great for getting a Cluster Missile behind cover, effectively denying enemies access to it. In addition to the Plasma Railgun, I have one other weapon idea. It was actually quite difficult coming up with a weapon that would work well with Northstar while still having as much depth as the Railgun, and this gun went through many different iterations. Originally, I thought that a solid beam weapon would work, but I quickly realized it would be too strong against pilots and close quarters fights. Then I thought a DMR style weapon would work well, but then I remembered that Northstar is more about burst damage than sustained damage. All of this eventually led me to my current idea, the Particle Rifle. Upon pulling the trigger, the weapon would fire a hit-scan beam for a short duration. This wouldn't be a constant beam, as in the longer you hold the trigger, the longer the beam fires, but rather, you pull the trigger once and the beam fires for a duration. To illustrate this, take a look at the binary rifle in Halo 5. This beam would have high vertical recoil, but that recoil would be reduced the more you're zoomed in. Firing the weapon with hipfire would cause it to be extremely unstable, making it somewhat ineffective at close range. The Particle Rifle wouldn't have a traditional magazine, but would have an overheat system like the Trace Rifle and L-Star. Firing the weapon would build up heat that would slowly vent over time. Players could press the reload button to vent excess heat much quicker, but this would make you vulnerable. If the player fired 3 beams in quick succession or didn't properly vent their weapon, the weapon would overheat, requiring the player to go through a long reload animation where they swap out the power source. Pacing your shots and landing critical hits would be much more essential on the Particle Rifle than the Plasma Railgun. Against pilots, players would need to ensure that the beam remains on target for the majority of its duration. Otherwise, you would need to fire a second shot. For attachments, players could choose between Heatsink, Thermal Vent, Threat Optics, and Focus Lens. Heatsink would cause a weapon to generate less heat, allowing you to fire it more often before overheating. Thermal vent would cause the weapon to vent much faster and speed up the reload animation of the overheat. Threat optics would work the same way it does on the plasma railgun, and focus lens would reduce the weapon's recoil. Next, let's talk about Northstar's core ability. Personally, I'm torn on Flight Core. On one hand, I'm not a big fan of damage-based cores, but on the other hand, I feel that Northstar often needs that extra damage to defend herself. But the biggest issue I have with Flight Core is how it's the one part of her kit that goes against her overall design. Flight Core leaves you so exposed that it's often a suicide core, and it requires you to do the opposite of what Northstar was designed to do. So to replace Flight Core, what if Northstar had a completely new core ability called Amp Core? Upon activation, Amp Core would, as the name implies, amp your weapon to make it stronger. The plasma railgun would charge significantly faster, and the particle rifle would build up significantly less heat and vent faster. This would give Northstar the defense that she often needs, without sacrificing what makes her effective. Amp Core would also allow enemy titans to escape by retreating behind cover, and enemies could still block your weapon shots with their defensive abilities, so good timing and positioning would still be key to using it effectively. This is a skill set that Northstar players are already familiar with, so I think they would feel right at home using this core. Moving on to the Titan kits, every single one of Northstar's Titanfall 2 kits have been integrated into the Variance and weapon attachments, so once again I had to come up with 4 completely new kits. This actually took a long time. As I said earlier, Northstar has been the hardest Titan to redesign. Her first kit would be Evasive Frame. This is Northstar's chassis-specific kit, so it would make her resistant to arc effects. Additionally, Evasive Frame would also make Northstar's dashes regenerate faster. Next is the Sniper Core kit. Sniper Core causes Amp Core to be extended whenever you land critical hits. This is a pretty skill-based kit, but I don't think Northstar mains would shy away from the challenge. The third kit is the Sharpshooter kit. This kit reduces Northstar's ability cooldowns when she lands a critical hit. And the last kit option would be the Amped Extension kit. This would cause Amp Core to affect friendly Titans and pilots in different ways. Upon activating Amp Core, friendly Titans that remain close to Northstar during the core's duration would receive a small damage boost, and pilots who are near Northstar when she activates Amp Core would gain amped weapons for 30 seconds. Anyways, that concludes my Northstar redesign. Like I said before, this was the hardest redesign to come up with, and I'm sure it's far from perfect. If you guys have any ideas of your own, please leave them down in the comments. I'm still trying to think of a third variant for VTOL Hover, and a third weapon would always be a welcome addition. Now you may think that the video ends here, but I've been saving a surprise for the end of this video. So on that note, let's move on to the last topic. Have you ever fought an Arc Titan in Frontier Defense and thought to yourself, I want to play as that? Well, I've got a Titan for you. The Tesla Titan is a new idea that I came up with, but given how passionate the community is about this franchise, I wouldn't be surprised if other people have already suggested something similar. Like many Titanfall fans, I really enjoyed using the Arc Cannon back in Titanfall 1, and was kind of sad that it didn't return for Titanfall 2. This is probably because the Arc Cannon was a bit too powerful and genuinely annoying to fight against. But I think with proper rebalancing, the Arc Cannon could be a great weapon in the game. My idea for an arc-based Titan originally stemmed from wanting to see the Arc Cannon return, but I don't think an entire Titan should be shoehorned into the game for the purpose of bringing back a single gun. So from here I asked myself what kind of unique role I wanted the Titan to fill. I ended up coming to the conclusion that Titanfall 3 could really use a dedicated flanking harasser Titan, and from here I designed the rest of Tesla's loadout. Now I know that some people may argue that Ronin already fills that same role, but I think that hit and run attacks are different from flanking and harassment. Ronin is much more direct and aggressive, often commanding his enemy's attention. Tesla would play completely differently, acting more as a constant thorn in your side rather than a direct upfront attacker, and this is reflected in his kit. If anything, Tesla would play more like Northstar than Ronin. In fact, the way I envision how he plays would almost be like a Ronin-Northstar hybrid of sorts, and given how different those two Titans are from each other, I think this combination is a completely new playstyle entirely. Now I can already start to hear players foaming at the mouth at the idea of constantly being stunned by an incredibly annoying Titan, which is why I think it's important to note that Tesla's weapons wouldn't cause stun effects, and most of his abilities wouldn't either unless you select specific variants. Don't worry, I hate arc grenades just as much as you do. With that being said, as an arc-based Titan, stunning effects are an integral part of Tesla's design, which is why every Titan in the game has a kit which cuts the duration of arc effects. Anyways, I think I've rambled enough, so let's get into it. Let's start with Tesla's abilities. Since Tesla isn't a frontline fighting Titan, I think a good defensive ability for him would be an electric smoke mine. This would deter enemy Titans from pursuing you, as well as obstructing their vision, allowing you to make your escape. These would be placed on the ground similar to the way that tether traps are, but would take a few seconds before being armed to prevent players from just throwing them down at enemy Titans. When an enemy comes into close proximity with the mine, it would detonate, covering the area in electric smoke. You could also shoot the electric smoke mines to detonate them early. Players could have a total of 4 electric smoke mines on the field at any given time, after which, if players use the ability again, it will replace one already on the ground. Unlike the electric smoke countermeasure, electric smoke from the mine would cause damage to your own Titan, so you would need to be careful where you place it. For Variance, players could choose between Stun Mine, Double Mine, and Extended Mine. As the name implies, Stun Mine would apply a brief stun effect upon detonation. This would force enemies who don't have a dash available to take damage from the electric smoke. Double Mine does exactly what you think, giving players a second charge and allowing them to place 2 electric smoke mines. Lastly, Extended Mine would increase the radius of the electric smoke created upon detonation, making the smoke harder to avoid or run through. Tesla's next ability is the Arc Capacitor. This is a small physical device that is fired from a shoulder-mounted launcher and latches onto whichever surface it lands on. Then, whenever the player fires a weapon at or near the capacitor, it will cause the shot to arc into it. The capacitor will then amp the shot to deal more damage before redirecting it into the nearest enemy and causing it to chain to multiple targets. Doing this will cause the capacitor to take damage, and after sustaining too much, it will be destroyed. As a physical object, enemy players could find and destroy it to disable its effect. With proper placement and positioning, the Arc Capacitor could allow you to hit multiple enemies on the other side of a building or wall. This contributes to the indirect nature of the Titan, and since Tesla has the weakest chassis with a defensive ability that doesn't mitigate damage, I think this ability fits well into his design. For Variance, players could choose between Reinforced Capacitor, Enhanced Capacitor, or Hazardous Capacitor. Reinforced Capacitor could absorb more damage before being destroyed, allowing you to amp more shots through it and making it harder for enemies to destroy. Enhanced Capacitor would cause shots to redirect over a longer range and chain between targets farther apart, while Hazardous Capacitor would explode when destroyed, creating a large arc explosion that would deal damage and stun anyone close to it. Tesla's last ability would be the Arc Charge. This would be like a large arc grenade that Tesla could throw, which would deal damage and stun enemies in a large radius. The Arc Charge would bounce off hard surfaces twice before detonating, allowing you to ricochet into hard-to-reach spots and around corners. However, if the Arc Charge comes into contact with an enemy, it will detonate instantly. Players could hold the Arc Charge in their hands while they figure out where they want to throw it. While doing so, if the player presses the left trigger, they will roll on the ground like a giant electric bowling ball. This would cause the Arc Charge to be on a traditional grenade timer. By holding the Arc Charge in your hands, you could cook it like a frag grenade, causing it to detonate early. However, when thrown, the Arc Charge would still need to hit 2 surfaces before detonating, regardless of how long it was cooked. If you cook the Arc Charge for too long, then it will explode in your hands, both damaging and stunning you. The same would happen if you get caught in the Arc Charge's blast radius, so make sure you're far away from your target before use. The Arc Charge would also cause your own electric smoke mines to detonate if they get caught in the explosion radius, which could both help or hurt you. How much damage the Arc Charge deals would be dependent on how close the target is to the charge when it detonates. A direct impact would deal about half a bar of Titan damage and would steadily decrease the farther away the target is. Against pilots, the Arc Charge would be an instant kill if they are close to the detonation, but they could survive with low health and a stun effect if they are a bit farther away. When thrown at an Arc Capacitor, the Arc Charge would cause it to send out chain lightning that deals the full half bar of damage and stuns every enemy it hits before being destroyed. For Variance, players choose between Heavy Arc Charge, Enhanced Proximity Charge, and EMP Charge. Heavy Arc Charge would increase the blast radius, allowing you to inflict damage more reliably and hit enemies from farther away. Enhanced Proximity Charge would cause the Arc Charge to detonate when close to an enemy, rather than requiring it to hit 2 surfaces. This would also give players a trajectory indicator so they could see exactly where their charge will go when thrown or rolled. Lastly, EMP Charge would deal no damage, but would temporarily prevent enemies from using their abilities instead. I know that when all these abilities are laid out, this Titan may seem overpowered. It's difficult to fully translate a theoretical idea into a video, and ultimately this idea is just that. It's theoretical. When I first envisioned the Titan, I thought it would be severely underpowered, but as I developed his loadout more and more, I started to see his potential. I don't see Tesla being too powerful since he's a very hazardous Titan that can easily damage himself with his own abilities, and he lacks any form of direct fighting strength. In his given situation, I think he would be extremely effective, but when out in the open, I feel like he'd be torn apart like tissue paper since he lacks a damage mitigating defensive ability. For weapons and attachments, I think it's safe to say that I would love to see a modified version of the Arc Cannon return, and I think many other players would agree. As annoying as the Arc Cannon was in Titanfall 1, I think many people can appreciate how unique of a weapon it was. Now in Titanfall 1, the Arc Cannon had 2 different variants. There was a default version and the capacitor version. To make the weapon different enough from the plasma railgun, I think the capacitor version would be best. This required the player to fully charge the Arc Cannon before firing. Unlike Titanfall 1, I think players should be able to hold a full charge for a brief time before the weapon fires. Sadly, to properly rein the weapon in, I think that many of the Arc Cannon's more unique features would need to be nerfed or removed so that the weapon could become more balanced. The changes I would make go as follows. 1. Remove the visual distortion effect when hit by the arc cannon. 2. Move the defensive ability drain function to a weapon attachment. 3. Remove the chaining function. And 4. Remove the arc cannon's ability to destroy incoming ordnance. With these changes, I think the arc cannon would make for a great addition to Titanfall 3. For attachments, players could choose between Quick Charger, Overcharge, Enhanced Battery, or Arc Drain. Quick Charger would make the arc cannon charge faster, but reduce the damage. This would cause the arc cannon to have higher sustained damage per second, but significantly less burst damage. Overcharge would almost be the complete opposite. With Overcharge equipped, players could still charge and release the weapon normally. However, after the weapon is fully charged, players could choose to continue holding the trigger. This would destabilize the weapon, increasing its damage. After firing, however, the player would need to go through a long reload animation to swap out the power source. Enhanced Battery would increase the range of the arc cannon, and Arc Drain would allow the arc cannon to drain defensive abilities. In addition to the arc cannon, players could also select a new weapon called the Arc Stream. This would be an electric flamethrower of sorts, kind of like the Rieger Carbine from Mass Effect 3, but it would have a similar range to the arc cannon. Unlike the arc cannon, this weapon would have no charge time and could be fired continuously. This would build up heat like the L-Star, Trace Rifle, and Particle Rifle, and would slowly vent when not being fired. Players could also press the reload button to vent it faster, but this would leave them vulnerable. If the weapon is overheated, the player would need to go through a long reload animation where they swap out the weapon's power source. For attachments, players could choose between Heatsink, Thermal Vent, Enhanced Battery, and Arc Drain. Enhanced Battery and Arc Drain would work identically to how it does on the arc cannon, increasing the weapon's range and draining defensive abilities respectively. Heatsink and Thermal Vent would work identically to how it does on the Trace Rifle and Particle Rifle, allowing you to fire your weapon longer before overheating and decreasing the time it takes to vent excess heat and swap the power source. Tesla's core ability would be called EMP Core. Upon activation, Tesla would emit a massive electromagnetic pulse in a large radius, initially stunning all affected enemy titans, disabling abilities in use, and preventing enemies from using their abilities for 10 seconds. This would also affect enemy titans' core abilities. For this reason, when EMP Core is fully charged, Tesla's chassis would emit a visual electric storm. When activated, there would be a brief charge-up time and the electric storm would intensify before releasing the pulse. EMP Core would not disable enemy weapons, but titans affected by it would have a visual distortion effect for its duration. I think this would be a great team support core, and coordinating its use with your team could lead to some great clutch plays. For a core ability that deals no damage, I think EMP Core could be absolutely devastating if used at the right moment. For Tesla's Titan-specific kits, like all the other Titans, Tesla would have 4 different kits to choose from. The first would be the Maelstrom kit. This kit would be fairly simple, increasing the damage dealt by Electric Smoke Mine, and Arc Charge. Next is the Perpetual Charge kit. This kit would make it so that when your EMP Core is fully charged, your ability cooldown is reduced and the electrical storm effect deals damage to enemies in close proximity to your Titan. The third kit is Feedback Chassis. This is Tesla's chassis-specific kit, but unlike the other Titans, this one functions a bit differently. Instead of just resisting stun effects, Feedback Chassis makes Tesla completely immune to them. In addition to this, Tesla's abilities no longer deal self-damage. The last kit is called Core Siphon. With this kit equipped, when you activate EMP Core, your abilities are automatically recharged and the pulse deals half a bar of damage to all Titans affected. Additionally, Tesla will gain a layer of shields depending on how many enemies EMP Core hits. Enemy Titans will generate 25% of a shield, Reapers will generate 10% of a shield, and pilots and minions will generate 5% of a shield. Before I end this video, I want to give a quick shout out to my friend Xander for drawing the Tesla concept image. You can find him and some of his other work over on Twitter, which I'll link down in the description. And on that final note, it's time to wrap this Titan and video up. I know that there's pretty much no chance of this Titan actually making its way into Titanfall 3, but I still enjoyed designing him nonetheless. Ultimately, I'm making this series because I enjoy thinking about game design, not because I actually think I'll influence Respawn's design decisions. If you guys have any ideas of your own, I would love to hear them down in the comments section. What do you guys think about the Tesla Titan? Do you think he's too over or underpowered? Thanks for watching, and I'll hopefully see you guys in the next video where I'll discuss the Ogre Titan redesigns.
Titan eliminated. Nicely done.